I paid 35,000 baht for her divorce. She showed me the papers, told me the lawyer needed the money up front, said it would take 3 months to process. That was in February 2019. By August, I'd moved her into my apartment in Bangkok. By December, I was planning to propose. In January 2020, her husband knocked on my door. Let me back up. I'm not the kind of person who falls for scams. I've lived in Asia for 12 years. Singapore first, then Malaysia, then Thailand. I know how things work. I understand the cultural differences, the economic realities, the complexities of relationships between Western men and Thai women. Or at least, I thought I did. Turns out, knowing something intellectually and actually seeing it when it's happening to you are two completely different things. I met Lek in December 2018. Not her real name, obviously, but close enough. I was 43 at the time, working remotely as a software consultant for companies back in Australia. Good money, complete freedom to live anywhere with decent internet. Bangkok made sense. Low cost of living, great food, interesting culture. And yes, I'll be honest, attractive women who seemed genuinely interested in Western men. I wasn't actively looking for a relationship, but I wasn't opposed to one either. We met at a coffee shop in Thong Lo, one of those trendy places where young Thais go to take Instagram photos of overpriced lattes. She was sitting at the table next to mine, struggling with her laptop. The screen kept flickering. I'm a tech guy, so I noticed immediately it was probably a loose connection in the display cable. I offered to help. She was grateful, sweet, a little shy. We talked for 2 hours. She told me she worked in marketing for a Thai cosmetics company. She was 29, originally from Udon Thani, but had been in Bangkok for 6 years. She spoke decent English, better than most Thais I'd met. She didn't ask me for anything. She didn't even want me to pay for her coffee. I asked for her line ID before I left. She gave it to me without hesitation. That night, we chatted for hours. She asked about Australia, about my work, about why I'd chosen Thailand. I asked about her family, her job, her dreams. It felt natural, easy. She made me laugh. I haven't felt that kind of connection with someone in years. My last serious relationship had ended 3 years earlier, and I'd convinced myself I was fine being single. But talking to Lek reminded me what I'd been missing. We went on our first proper date 3 days later. Dinner at a Japanese restaurant in Ekamai. She dressed beautifully, but not provocatively. She was attentive, asked questions, seemed genuinely interested in my answers. She told me about growing up in Isaan, about her parents who still farmed rice, about her younger brother who was studying at university in Khon Kaen. She paid for half the dinner before I could stop her. That impressed me. So many Thai women I'd met expected the man to pay for everything. She insisted it was only fair since we were just getting to know each other. On our third date, she told me she was married. We were walking through Benjakitti Park after dinner. She stopped, looked at the lake, and said she needed to be honest with me before things went any further. She'd gotten married at 22 to her boyfriend from university. They'd been together since she was 19. Her parents had pushed for the marriage. In Isaan culture, she explained, you're expected to marry young, but it hadn't worked out. He'd changed after the wedding, became jealous and controlling. He didn't want her to work, didn't want her to have friends, didn't want her to live in Bangkok. They'd separated 2 years ago when she moved to Bangkok for her job. They hadn't lived together since. She was in the process of getting divorced. But in Thailand, she said, these things take time, especially when the husband doesn't want to cooperate. I should have asked more questions right then. I should have asked to see the separation papers, asked for proof they'd been living apart, asked for specifics about the divorce proceedings. But I didn't, because she was crying, because she looked so vulnerable and ashamed, because my instinct was to comfort her, not interrogate her. I told her I understood, that everyone has a past, that what mattered was moving forward. She was so relieved. She hugged me tight and said she'd been terrified to tell me, terrified I'd walk away. She said most men would have. She said I was different. That's what I wanted to believe. That I was different. That I was one of the good ones. That my being understanding and mature and accepting made me special. Looking back, I can see how that belief made me blind to everything else. We became exclusive after that conversation. She started staying over at my apartment a few nights a week. The sex was incredible. She was affectionate, enthusiastic, seemingly insatiable. She'd text me throughout the day, send photos of her lunch, ask what I was working on, tell me she missed me. She introduced me to her friends, other young Thai women who worked in offices around Bangkok. They all spoke English well, all seemed legitimate. We'd go out for dinner or drinks, and they'd joke with me, tease Lek about how happy she seemed, ask when we were getting married. It all felt so normal, so real. In February, about 2 months after we'd met, she brought up the divorce again. We were lying in bed on a Saturday morning. She was tracing patterns on my chest with her finger. She said her lawyer had finally gotten her husband to agree to the divorce. He'd been refusing to sign the papers, but the lawyer had convinced him. There was just one problem. The legal fees were expensive. 35,000 baht. She didn't have that kind of money saved. She'd been sending most of her salary back to her parents to help with her brother's university fees and her father's medical bills. He had diabetes, she'd told me before. The medication was expensive. She wasn't asking me for the money. She made that clear. She was just explaining why the divorce was taking so long. She'd been saving, but it would take her another 4 or 5 months to have enough. She seemed resigned to waiting. She said she understood if I didn't want to continue our relationship while she was still technically married. She'd understand if I wanted to see other people until everything was finalized. Of course, I gave her the money. What else was I supposed to do? I loved her. I was pretty sure I loved her. And 35,000 baht was nothing to me. Less than $1,000. I spent more than that on my laptop. If it meant we could move forward with our lives together. If it meant she could finally be free of a marriage that made her miserable. It was the easiest decision in the world, she cried. When I transferred the money to her account, she said she'd pay me back. I told her not to be ridiculous. She said I was the best man she'd ever known. She said she couldn't believe how lucky she was. She said she loved me. It was the first time either of us had said it. I said it back immediately. The lawyer needed 3 months to process everything, she told me. By May, she'd be divorced. By May, we could start planning our future properly. Maybe I could meet her parents. Maybe we could talk about getting engaged. She'd always wanted a small wedding, she said. Nothing too expensive, just family and close friends. Maybe on a beach somewhere. Koh Samui or Phuket. She'd looked so happy describing it. Those 3 months were the best of my life. I was in love, completely, stupidly, blindly in love. She was staying over 5 or 6 nights a week by then. She'd brought clothes and toiletries to keep at my apartment. She cooked for me these incredible Isaan dishes her mother had taught her. Some tam, lab, sticky rice. She'd sit on my lap while I worked, playing with my hair, kissing my neck. We'd watch Netflix together, go to weekend markets, take day trips to Ayutthaya and Kanchanaburi. She took photos of everything, posted them on her Instagram and Facebook. Couple photos, she tagged me in all of them. She called me her boyfriend in the captions, said she was the happiest she'd ever been. I met her friends multiple times. We even met up with her brother once, when he came to Bangkok for the weekend. He seemed like a good kid, studying engineering, grateful when I paid for dinner. He thanked me for taking care of his sister, said his parents would want to meet me soon. Everything was lining up perfectly. May came and went. When I asked about the divorce, she said there'd been a delay. The courts were backed up. Her lawyer said it would be another month, maybe 6 weeks. These things happen in Thailand, she explained. The legal system moves slowly. I believed her because I had no reason not to. She seemed frustrated by the delay, too. She wanted to be officially divorced, she said, so we could move forward without anything hanging over us. In July, she moved in properly. She'd been spending every night at my place anyway, and her lease was up on her studio apartment in On Nut. It made financial sense. Why pay rent on a place she never stayed at? I helped her move her stuff over. It wasn't much. Some clothes, some books, some photos of her family. She didn't have a lot of possessions. She said she preferred to live simply. I gave her a key. I added her as an authorized user on my internet account, so the building security would let her in anytime. I introduced her to my neighbors as my girlfriend. She was charming with everyone, always smiling, always polite. The old Thai lady who lived next door loved her, would stop her in the hallway to chat in Thai, would sometimes give her food to bring home. In August, the divorce was finalized, or so she told me. She showed me papers, official-looking documents with stamps and signatures. I can read some Thai, but not well enough to understand legal documents. Everything looked legitimate. She was so relieved. She cried happy tears. She said she finally felt free. We went out for a celebration dinner at a nice restaurant in Sathorn. She posted a photo on Instagram with a caption about new beginnings. I commented with a heart emoji. Everything felt perfect. September and October passed in domestic bliss. We talked about the future constantly. She wanted kids someday, she said. 2 kids, a boy and a girl. I'd never seriously thought about having children before, but when she talked about it, I could picture it. I could see us with a family. We looked at houses online, talked about maybe buying something outside Bangkok in a few years, somewhere with a garden. She wanted to grow vegetables like her mother. In November, she said her parents wanted to meet me. She'd been telling them all about me, she said. They were traditional and wanted to make sure I was serious about their daughter before we took things any further. Would I be willing to visit them in Udon Thani? Maybe for a long weekend? I agreed immediately. Of course I wanted to meet her parents. This was the natural progression of things. We planned the trip for December. She was excited but nervous. She coached me on Thai family etiquette, how to weigh properly to her parents, what gifts to bring, how to show respect. She said, Her father could be stern, but he'd warm up once he saw how much I cared about her. She said her mother would love me immediately, but we never made that trip. In early December, small things started to seem off. Nothing major, nothing I could quite put my finger on. She was on her phone more than usual. When I'd walk into the room, she'd sometimes quickly lock the screen or angle it away from me. When I asked who she was messaging, she'd say it was her friends or her mother. Her tone was just slightly defensive, just slightly sharp. Not enough to argue about, but enough to notice. She started going out more with her friends. Girls' nights, she called them. Once or twice a week. She'd come home late, around midnight or 1 in the morning, smelling like cigarettes and alcohol. I didn't mind her having a social life, but it was a change from our previous routine. When I mentioned it, she said her friends had been complaining she never saw them anymore, since she'd been spending all her time with me. She needed to maintain her friendships, she said. I agreed. I didn't want to be that controlling boyfriend. One night in mid-December, I was using her laptop because mine was updating. She'd left her Facebook logged in. I wasn't snooping. I swear I wasn't. I was just going to my own Facebook page. But when I opened the browser, her messages were there. And I saw a name I didn't recognize. A Thai man's name. There were a lot of messages between them. Recent messages. I didn't read them. I closed the laptop immediately, but my heart was pounding. I told myself it was nothing. It was probably a coworker, or a friend's boyfriend, or her brother's friend. There were 100 innocent explanations. I was being paranoid and insecure. I was projecting my own fears onto a completely normal situation, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Over the next few days, I paid more attention. I noticed she took her phone with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. I noticed she'd changed her phone password. She used to just use her thumbprint, but now there was a 6-digit code. When I asked her about it, she said her company had required it for security reasons since she accessed work email on her phone. That made sense. I let it go. On Christmas Eve, we were supposed to have a quiet night at home. She'd promised to cook a special dinner, but around 4 in the afternoon, she got a phone call. She took it in the bedroom. She was speaking Thai, so I couldn't understand most of it, but her tone was urgent. When she came out, she said her friend was having an emergency, a breakup. She was devastated and needed Lek to come over right away. I asked if I could come too, if there was anything I could do to help. She said no, it was better if it was just the girls. Her friend was embarrassed and didn't want a man there while she was crying. That made sense. I told her to go to take care of her friend. She left around 5. She said she'd be back by 10 at the latest. By 11, I was worried. By midnight, I was calling her phone repeatedly. It went straight to voicemail. By 1 in the morning, I was imagining car accidents and hospital emergencies. By 2, she walked through the door, apologizing profusely. Her friend had been in such a bad state, she explained. She'd lost track of time. Her phone had died. I was so relieved she was safe that I didn't even question it. Christmas Day was fine. Normal. We exchanged gifts. I gave her a gold necklace I'd bought at a jewelry store in Siam Paragon. She gave me a watch. We had breakfast, watched movies, had sex. It was a good day. I convinced myself I'd been overreacting about everything. But the next day, she got another phone call, another friend emergency. This time, she said her coworker was sick and needed someone to cover her shift. I didn't know she ever worked shifts. She'd told me she worked normal office hours, 9 to 6. When I asked about it, she got defensive. She said it was a special project, a product launch that required weekend work. Some people had to be at the event venue. She'd volunteered to help because her coworker had food poisoning. I apologized for questioning her. She left around noon and came back around 8 that evening. Looking back now, I can see how obvious it was. But when you're in it, when you love someone, when you want to believe them, you find ways to explain away everything. Your brain does gymnastics to avoid the painful truth that's staring you in the face. The week between Christmas and New Year was strange. She was distant, distracted. She'd be sitting next to me on the couch, but she wasn't really there. Her mind was somewhere else. When I'd ask what she was thinking about, she'd say work stress or family stuff. Her brother's tuition payment was coming up, she said. Her father needed to see a specialist in Bangkok, she said. There was always something. On New Year's Eve, we went to a party at her friend's condo in Sukhumvit. I knew a few of the people there from previous gatherings. Everyone was drinking, celebrating, counting down to midnight. At around 11, Lek disappeared. I couldn't find her anywhere. I checked the bathroom, the bedroom, the balcony. Finally, I found her in the stairwell on her phone. She was speaking Thai in a low, urgent voice. When she saw me, she quickly hung up. She said her mother had called, worried about her father. Everything was fine, but she'd needed to step away from the noise to hear properly. We went back inside. At midnight, we kissed. She held me tight and said she loved me. I believed her. January started with a cold snap. Bangkok got unusually chilly, down to 18 or 19 degrees. Lek complained about the cold constantly, wrapped herself in blankets, wore my hoodies around the apartment. It would have been cute if everything else hadn't felt so wrong. She was spending more time away. She'd leave in the morning, saying she was going to the office. But sometimes she wouldn't come back until late evening. When I asked if she was working late, she'd say yes, they were in the middle of their Q1 planning. Everything was crazy at work. I suggested I could bring her dinner at the office, make sure she was eating properly. She said no. Her boss wouldn't appreciate personal visitors in the office during crunch time. That made sense. I didn't push it. One night, I couldn't sleep. It was around 2 in the morning. Lek was beside me, her phone on the nightstand, face up. It lit up with a notification, a line message. I could see the preview on the lock screen. It was from a name I'd seen before. The same Thai man's name from her Facebook messages. The message was in Thai, but I could make out enough. Something about missing her. Something about tomorrow. My hands were shaking as I picked up her phone. I knew the password now. I'd watched her type it enough times when she didn't know I was paying attention. 4827. I unlocked it. I went to her line messages. I started reading. I sat in that bed for 2 hours, reading everything, every message, going back months. My whole body was numb. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was just frozen, scrolling, reading, watching my entire relationship disintegrate into pixels on a screen. They'd been talking since October. Before that, even. The messages went back to September, right after she'd supposedly gotten divorced. Pet names, plans to meet, photos they'd sent each other. Nothing explicit, but intimate. The kind of messages you send to someone you're in a relationship with. He called her Tarak, darling. She called him darling back in English. There were messages about me, about the Farang boyfriend who was nice but boring, about how she had to be careful not to let me find out, about how he needed to be patient. She was handling it. There were messages about money. He'd sent her 5,000 baht in November. She'd thanked him, said her Farang boyfriend was cheap despite having money. That hurt more than anything. I'd given her 35,000 baht for a divorce that apparently never happened, and she was calling me cheap. I kept reading because I had to know everything. I had to understand the full scope of the betrayal. There were messages about meeting up when I was at work. There were messages about how she'd told me she was going to see friends, when really she was with him. The Christmas Eve emergency, she'd been with him. The Christmas Day shift work, she'd been with him. New Year's Eve, when she'd disappeared, she'd been texting him, telling him she wished she was with him instead of at a party with boring people. The most recent messages were from that same day. Earlier that evening, before bed, she'd told him she'd try to see him tomorrow. She said she missed him. She said she loved him. She'd sent a heart emoji. I put the phone down exactly where I'd found it. I lay back down in bed. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. Lek woke around 7. She stretched, smiled at me, kissed my cheek. She asked if I'd slept well. I said yes. She got up, went to shower, got dressed. She said she had to go to the office early. She'd be back around 6. I said okay. She kissed me goodbye. The moment the door closed, I got up. I made coffee. I sat at my desk. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I should be crying or screaming or breaking things, but I was just empty, hollow. I kept replaying moments in my head, recontextualizing everything through this new lens. Every time she'd smiled at me, every time she'd said she loved me, every time we'd made love. Had any of it been real? Had I imagined the connection between us? Was I really that delusional? I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think. I spent the day going through everything I could find. Her Facebook, her Instagram, her email that she'd logged into on my laptop once. I found more. So much more. Photos on her phone that she'd deleted from her main gallery, but that were still in her recently deleted folder. Photos of her with him. Photos of them at restaurants I recognized. One of them was a place she'd told me she was going with her girlfriends. She'd sent me a photo from that night. The photo she'd sent me had been cropped. The original had him in it, his arm around her. I found old messages in her email, from before we'd met. She'd been with him for 3 years. 3 years. They'd met when she was 26. He was Thai, around 35 based on the photos. He worked in construction, made decent money. They'd been serious. There were emails about plans to get married. There were emails about meeting each other's families. Then there were emails from December 2018, right before she met me. They'd had a huge fight. He'd accused her of cheating on him with other men. Farang men, specifically. She'd denied it, but the accusation was there. They'd broken up. Badly. She'd moved out of the place they'd been sharing. That must have been the studio in On Nut she'd supposedly been living in alone. Then in January, right after we'd become exclusive, there were emails of them reconnecting. She'd reached out to him, said she missed him, said she'd made a mistake. They'd started seeing each other again in secret. By February, they were back together fully. By March, they were saying they loved each other again. And this whole time, I was the other man. I was the stupid Farang who paid for things and provided stability while she maintained her real relationship with the man she actually loved. I was the safety net, the backup plan, the walking ATM she'd called me in her messages, the 35,000 baht for the divorce. There was never a divorce. She'd never been married. That was a lie, too. I found old photos from her Facebook, public posts from years ago. There were photos from university, photos with friends, photos from parties. Never any mention of a husband. Never any wedding photos. She'd invented the entire story. The separated husband in Isaan, the complicated divorce, the legal fees. All of it was fiction designed to extract money from me. When she came home that evening, I was sitting on the couch, waiting. She walked in smiling, asking what I wanted for dinner. I asked her to sit down. My voice must have sounded different because her smile faded. She asked what was wrong. I asked her who the Thai man in her line messages was. I said his name. She went pale. She started to say something, then stopped. She asked how I knew about that. I told her I'd gone through her phone. I expected her to explode, to accuse me of invading her privacy, to flip the script. But she just sat there, frozen. I asked her how long she'd been cheating on me. She said she wasn't cheating. He was just a friend. I took out my phone. I'd taken photos of her messages the night before, just in case. I started reading them out loud. The intimate messages, the plans to meet, the pet names, the message where she'd called me boring. Her face crumbled. She tried to explain. She said it was complicated. She said she did care about me, but she'd been with him for so long. She couldn't just end it. She said she'd been planning to break up with him. She just needed more time. She said she was sorry. She said she never meant to hurt me. I asked about the divorce, about the 35,000 baht. She started crying. She admitted there was no divorce. She'd never been married. She'd needed the money for her brother's tuition and her father's medical bills. Everything she'd told me about her family was true, she insisted. Her father really did have diabetes. Her brother really was in university. She'd just lied about being married because she thought I'd be more willing to give her money if I thought it was for legal fees rather than just family support. I asked why she didn't just ask me directly for help with her family. I would have helped. I cared about her family because I cared about her. She said she didn't know if I'd say yes. She said a lot of Farang men don't want to support Thai families. She'd been scared I'd think she was just using me for money. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me. I asked if she loved me, if any of it had been real. She said yes. She said she did love me, in her way. But she loved him too. She'd been with him longer. They had history. They understood each other in ways she and I couldn't because of cultural differences. She said in Thailand, it's not uncommon for women to have more than one relationship. She said I wouldn't understand because I wasn't Thai. I told her that was bullshit. Cheating isn't a cultural practice. Lying isn't a cultural practice. She'd made a choice to deceive me every single day for over a year. That wasn't about culture. That was about character. She got defensive then. She said I was being unfair. She said I'd gone through her phone without permission. She said I'd violated her trust. I almost laughed at that. Her trust. She said, if I really loved her, I'd understand that relationships in Thailand are more fluid. She said, Thai women often maintain multiple relationships for financial security. She said I was judging her based on Western values that don't apply here. I asked if she was still sleeping with him. She hesitated too long before saying no. That was answer enough. I asked when the last time was. She said a few weeks ago. I asked if she'd slept with me after sleeping with him. She didn't answer. I asked if she'd used protection with him. She said yes. I didn't believe her. I told her to leave. She started begging. She said she'd end things with him immediately. She said she'd choose me. She said she realized now that I was the one she really wanted. She said she'd been confused, but seeing how hurt I was made her understand what she was risking. She said she'd do anything to make it right. I asked her if she'd said the same things to him, if she'd told him she'd choose him too. She didn't answer. I told her again to leave. She said this was her home too. She'd been living here for 6 months. I told her she'd been living here under false pretenses. She'd been lying to me every day. She'd been using me. I wanted her out. She said she had nowhere to go. I suggested she go stay with her boyfriend, her real boyfriend. She grabbed some clothes, some essentials. She was crying the whole time. She kept saying she was sorry. She'd made a mistake. Couldn't we talk about this tomorrow when I'd calmed down? I said no. I'd given her my key back. I'd changed my door password immediately before she got home. The building security already knew not to let her up without my explicit permission. Before she left, she turned to me and said something I'll never forget. She said I was making a big deal out of nothing. She said I'd known from the beginning what she was. She said I'd met her, a young Thai woman in Bangkok, who spoke English well and was interested in an older foreign man, and I'd chosen to believe whatever story made me feel good about myself. She said I'd wanted to believe I was special, that I was different from other Farang men, that she loved me for me and not for my money or my passport. She said I'd lied to myself more than she'd ever lied to me. Then she left. I sat in my apartment for a long time after she was gone. The space felt different. All her things were still there. Her clothes in the closet, her toiletries in the bathroom, her coffee mug in the kitchen. I gathered everything up and put it in garbage bags. I called her the next day and told her she could come get her stuff from the building's security office. She never did. After a month, I threw it all away. I got tested for STDs. I was clean, thank God. That was my biggest fear in the immediate aftermath, that she'd given me something. The clinic nurse asked if this was a regular screening or if there'd been potential exposure. I told her there'd been potential exposure. She didn't ask for details. She just nodded sympathetically. I wonder how many Western men she sees in that clinic with the same story. The first 2 weeks were the worst. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, replaying conversations in my head, looking for clues I'd missed. And there were so many clues, so many moments where if I just asked one more question, pushed a little harder, demanded proof instead of accepting her word, I would have caught her. But I hadn't wanted to catch her. I'd wanted to believe her. That was my fatal flaw. I'd chosen belief over evidence because belief felt better. I started going back through all our photos together. I deleted most of them, but I kept a few. Not because I wanted to remember her, but because I wanted to remember this feeling. I wanted to remember how stupid I'd been so I'd never be this stupid again. In one photo, we're at a temple in Ayutthaya. She's smiling at the camera. I'm looking at her. You can see it in my face, how much I adored her, how completely I'd fallen for the performance. I found out later from one of her friends, one of the women I'd thought was genuinely her friend, that everyone knew. All of them knew about her Thai boyfriend. They'd known the whole time. They'd met him before they'd met me. When I'd see them at dinners, and they'd joke about when Lek and I were getting married, they'd known she was lying to me. They'd thought it was funny. The stupid Farang who believed everything his Thai girlfriend told him. I ran into one of them at a coffee shop in March. She seemed embarrassed to see me. I asked her why none of them had told me. She said it wasn't their business. She said in Thai culture, you don't interfere in other people's relationships. She said besides, Lek had told them I knew about her ex-boyfriend, but that I was okay with it, because Western relationships are more open. That was another lie. She'd even lied to her friends about lying to me. I thought about going to her office, confirming she actually worked, where she said she worked. But what was the point? Even if that part was true, it didn't change anything. The relationship was over. I'd never trust her again. I'd never trust anyone again, at least not for a long time. I found out through social media that she and her Thai boyfriend were still together. She'd unblocked me on Facebook for some reason, or maybe she'd just made her posts public. There were photos of them together. Couple photos. The kind she used to post of us. They looked happy. He looked smug. Maybe he knew about me. Maybe he'd known all along. Maybe they'd laughed about me together. I thought about messaging him, telling him what she'd done, warning him that she was a liar and a cheat. But why bother? Maybe he knew. Maybe he didn't care. Maybe he was using her the same way she'd used me. Maybe they deserved each other. 3 months after she moved out, she tried to contact me. She sent me some message online. She said she was sorry. She said she'd been young and stupid. She said she'd ended things with her boyfriend. She said she'd realized I was the one she'd really loved. She said if I'd give her another chance, she'd prove she'd changed. I didn't respond. 2 weeks later, I checked her Facebook again. She'd posted a photo with a different Western man, an older guy, maybe 55 or 60. They were at a restaurant on Khao San Road. The caption said something about new beginnings. I wondered if she'd told him the same stories. The fake marriage, the expensive divorce, the sick father, the brother in university. I wonder how long it took him to give her money. I wonder if he's figured out yet that she's lying. I wonder if someone tried to warn him and he didn't listen because he wanted to believe he was special. I wonder if he'll end up where I am, alone in an apartment, deleting photos, trying to figure out how he missed all the signs. Looking back now, almost 2 years later, I can see exactly when things started to fall apart. It was after she moved in. Before that, when we were still in the early honeymoon phase, she'd had the freedom to maintain both relationships without either of us getting suspicious. But once we were living together, it became harder for her to disappear for hours at a time. She had to create more elaborate lies. She had to be more careful. And that's when I started noticing things. The increased phone secrecy, the changed password, the defensive reactions when I asked simple questions. If she'd been smarter about it, she could have kept it going longer. If she'd been less greedy with her time, if she'd been more consistent with her lies, if she'd been more careful about her phone, I might never have found out. I might have married her. I might have had children with her. I might have spent decades believing I was her only partner while she maintained relationships with other men. That thought terrifies me more than anything else. Not that she lied, not that she cheated, but that I was so willing to believe her lies that I might have never discovered the truth. My wanting to believe in us made me blind to reality. That's the thing about love, or what I thought was love. It makes you stupid. It makes you ignore your instincts. It makes you rationalize things that should be deal breakers. I've thought a lot about what she said before she left, that I'd lied to myself more than she'd lied to me. I hate that she was right about that. I had constructed a narrative in my head about who she was and what our relationship was. I'd ignored anything that contradicted that narrative. When friends had made comments about Thai women and foreign men, about being careful, about making sure I really knew who I was with, I'd been offended on her behalf. I'd defended her. I'd insisted she was different. She wasn't like those other women. She loved me for me, but she wasn't different. She was exactly like the stereotype, and I'd been exactly like every other deluded foreign man who thinks he's found true love in Southeast Asia while ignoring every red flag. I'd thought my awareness of the cultural dynamics would protect me. I'd thought my 12 years in Asia made me savvy. But awareness doesn't protect you when you don't want to see what's right in front of you. The money doesn't even bother me that much. 35,000 baht is nothing. I've spent more on a laptop that I'll replace in 3 years. What bothers me is the time. I gave her 14 months of my life. 14 months of believing I was building something real with someone who felt the same way. 14 months of planning a future that was never going to happen. You can't get that time back. I stayed in Bangkok for 6 more months after she left. I thought about moving back to Australia, or maybe to Singapore where I'd been before Thailand. But I'd built a life in Bangkok. I had friends, a routine, clients who were in compatible time zones. Why should I leave because of her? So I stayed. But I moved apartments. I couldn't stand being in that space anymore. Every corner had memories. The kitchen where she'd cooked for me. The couch where we'd watched movies. The bed where we'd made love while she was sleeping with someone else. I dated a little bit, but my heart wasn't in it. Every Thai woman I met, I found myself questioning everything she said. Every sweet gesture seemed manipulative. Every expression of affection seemed calculated. It wasn't fair to them, but I couldn't help it. The trust was broken, not just with Lek, but with the entire concept of relationships. I eventually met someone, an expat woman, British, working for an NGO in Bangkok. We bonded over shared experiences of living abroad. We understood each other's frustrations with Thai bureaucracy, our sometimes complicated feelings about being foreigners in someone else's country. We took it slow, really slow. It took me months to trust her, to believe she was being honest with me about who she was and what she wanted. We've been together for 8 months now. It's good. It's stable. It's nothing like what I had with Lek, but maybe that's a good thing. What I had with Lek was intense and passionate and all-consuming, but it was also built on lies. What I have now is calmer, more measured, but it's real. I think it's real. I'm pretty sure it's real. I'm still learning how to trust my judgment again. I saw Lek one more time, about 3 months ago. I was at a restaurant in Thong Lo with friends. She was there with a Thai man. Not the boyfriend from when we were together. Someone new. Or maybe someone old. Maybe she'd been seeing him while we were together too. Who knows? Our eyes met across the restaurant. She smiled and waved like we were old friends who'd lost touch. Like she hadn't destroyed my ability to trust people. Like she hadn't taken 35,000 baht from me under false pretenses. Like she hadn't spent a year lying to my face. I didn't wave back. I turned to my friends and continued the conversation we'd been having. I didn't look at her again for the rest of the meal. When we left, I glanced over one last time. She was laughing at something her date had said, touching his arm, leaning in close, performing the same script she'd performed with me. He looked smitten. He looked exactly like I must have looked. I hope he's smarter than I was. I hope he asks more questions. I hope he demands proof when she tells him stories about needing money for family emergencies or legal fees. I hope he checks her phone when his gut tells him something's wrong. I hope he doesn't ignore his instincts in favor of believing what he wants to believe. But he probably won't, because that's what men like us do. We come to places like Thailand looking for something. Adventure, maybe. Freedom, a lower cost of living, a different life. And when a beautiful young woman shows interest in us, when she makes us feel desired and special and young again, we want to believe it's real. We want to believe we're the exception to every cautionary tale we've ever heard. We're not, though. We're just the next chapter in a story that's been told thousands of times. The details change, the names change, but the plot is always the same. Foreign man meets Thai woman. Foreign man falls in love. Foreign man ignores warning signs because he wants to believe. Foreign man discovers he's been lied to. Foreign man leaves or stays and gets lied to more. The end. The worst part isn't even the cheating or the lying. The worst part is realizing that you were never really in a relationship with a person. You were in a relationship with a performance. Everything you thought you knew about her, everything you thought you shared, was part of an act she was putting on. The real her was having those conversations with someone else, living her real life somewhere you weren't invited. I don't know if Lek ever actually loved me. Maybe in some small way she did. Maybe she compartmentalized her feelings, kept them separate. Maybe she genuinely enjoyed our time together, even while she was deceiving me. Or maybe every smile, every kiss, every I love you was just part of the performance. I'll never know. And I've learned that not knowing is something I have to live with. What I do know is this. If your Thai girlfriend suddenly changes her phone password, investigate. If she's spending more time with friends than with you, verify. If she needs money for legal fees or family emergencies, ask for documentation. If your gut tells you something's wrong, trust it. Don't ignore red flags because you want to believe you're different. Don't let your ego convince you that your relationship is special and exempt from the patterns everyone else experiences. And if you find out she's been lying to you, don't stay. Don't believe her when she says she'll change. Don't accept cultural explanations for dishonesty. Just leave. Pack her things. Change your locks. Block her number. Grieve the relationship you thought you had. And then move on. Because once trust is broken like that, it never comes back. You'll spend every day questioning everything, reading hidden meanings into innocent actions, waiting for the next lie. That's no way to live. I thought I was special. I thought I'd found something real. I thought my relationship was different from all those other Farang Thai relationships. That ended badly. I was wrong. I wasn't special. It wasn't real. It wasn't different. And neither are you. If you're reading this and seeing yourself in my story, if you're making the same excuses I made, if you're ignoring the same red flags I ignored, you're not going to be the exception. You're just going to be the next person telling this same story to the next person who won't listen. I loved her. Or I loved who I thought she was. And she didn't love me. She loved what I could provide. Maybe she loved her Thai boyfriend. Maybe she loved the money from the Western men she dated. Maybe she just loved the game of it all, seeing how long she could maintain the deception. It doesn't really matter anymore. She's gone. I'm here. I'm older and more cynical and less willing to believe in fairy tales. Some would say that's sad. I say it's realistic. I got hurt because I chose belief over evidence. I won't make that mistake again. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's this. Trust is earned, not given. Love doesn't make you blind unless you let it. And if someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time. Don't wait for proof. Don't wait for the messages on their phone. Don't wait for the other person to show up at your door. Just trust yourself and leave. I wish I had.